there's a long history about how this program started, and it wasn't so smooth in the beginning. But at this point, having kids with disabilities in camp, we call it tikva. It's as natural as having Shabbat or having campfires in Middle Road or anything. It's just what we do. Okay. So those are two things that really inspire me. But by way of discussion, I wanted to get you thinking. Where in our tradition or where in our texts do we come across people with disabilities or people who are different? So Moses is a great example. That's probably what do we know about it?
From Midrash, like he had a stammer?
Right. So that's the classic example. But if you go back, what does Torah say about what do we know in the Torah about Moses? Yeah, so we know he had whatever that means, some
circumcised.
Yeah, right. So I mean, how do people understand that? What is circumcised? Maybe it's a stammer or something. But what did Moses need to be successful?
Aaron.
He did Aaron, right? He wasn't, and
he's translated from Hebrew Jewish.
he spoke Spanish.
The thing is, he was a priest from the Egyptian court, so he didn't know how to, talk to the Jewish people.
Right.
And one possible interpretation, right?
Yeah.
He used his brother and said, go to talk to these Jews. I don't know how to talk to them.
Right. And how did when Moses was first approached? What was his first reaction? How did he? Yeah. Well, then, just like she said, thank you, no, thank you. you got the wrong guy. Take what you can, and then if I remember, I don't remember the exact words, but God just said, look, I know, I made everyone, I made you, I made the world, I used these people. I know what you have inside. I know you've got it, and you'll have help. You'll have Aaron. It'll be your. So that really has become the text, in the disabilities world. If Moses can do it and become such a great leader, then we can see past the speech part. Okay, so that was the first thing that came to your mind. But are there other examples that you can think of, either in halakha, either laws that have come down about people with disabilities, or think back to the characters in Tanakh. I mean, are there people who, if you go back and if you think back on them, are there people who maybe weren't so? I mean, everybody's not so perfect. I mean, that would be everybody, But are there anybody whose imperfections might be considered a disability? If you have older parents, 1 minute ago they were so full of life, and the next minute they really need a lot of our help. Or somebody can have a stroke, or an aneurysm, or get hit by a bus on the way out of the conference, God forbid. And 1 minute you were, so when he talks about, I mean, there are a lot of reasons to include people, but, it's a practical thing. That could be you, or it could be your parent, or it will be at some point somebody close to you. So maybe this is another two-parter with Yitzchak. I was telling Yafa that there was a book that came out a couple of years ago. It's by a woman who's, I forgot the exact, it's called Esau's Blessing, How the Bible Embraces Those with Special Needs. And each chapter goes through a famous, her name is Dr. Ora Horn-Prauser. She's there's an alternative rabbinical school called the Academy for Jewish Religion in New York. It's not Orthodox, so it runs across the denominations for rabbis and cantors. And she wrote a book, and each chapter talks about a different person that we know very well and disability. So Deanna hit on Moses. Moses is a classic one, but she has a chapter on Yitzchak. So she doesn't use the blind sort of, by the way, he's blind, but she focuses on, she uses a word that we would never get away with using nowadays. It's the older book, but she called it mental retardation. And that's one of those, we could have a whole thing about language. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow a little bit, about the choice of words we use, but nobody uses mental retardation anymore. Nobody, they call it the R word. And even kids are learning that if a friend says, that's so retarded, that people will say, that's not really a nice word. You don't say that. Because people don't mean it they don't mean retarded, intellectual disability. That's so stupid. She says, we would now say intellectual disabilities, or we would say cognitive disabilities. But she makes the case. What, I mean, can you, if I told you that she thinks he has intellectual disabilities, where do you think she gets that from? Think about Winobi Yitzhak. Is there anything that Winobi Yitzhak that could maybe make him think, maybe seem not so, cognitively up there? And I remember, the professor offended every religion equally, right? And I remember he said, he was a Reform rabbi, also a scholar, and he called Isaac a transitional character.
Right.
That there was Abraham and there was Yaakov, and so he didn't forward the narrative very much. He said he was a do-over, he was a placeholder, and so it was like the transition from A to C, he was B. But what you say, well, what could it be about Yosef? And she would say, his giftedness. And he said, well, how's that a disability? He was gifted, very, 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 very smart. Okay? And there's a whole, I used this slide earlier today about a person I said he's not able to read from the print, but he could follow a Talmud lesson, or a philosophy lecture if it was done by ear, right? And he also has cerebral palsy. And the word, I didn't know this word 10 years ago. They call it twice exceptional, or dually exceptional, exceptional on both sides. He's kind of off the chart. His needs are great on both sides. And I thought about this. If you've ever taught, in America, they have something like gifted and talented classes, or gifted, and it's just as hard to teach a gifted kid as it is to teach a kid. It is a type of special need, if you think about it. It's so, or I have a friend whose son, she's a single mother by choice, and she has a son who's so gifted. It's exhausting to be one parent with a kid. You can't just say, sit and read this book, because he's done with the book in a short period of time, and he's bored again. He needs that level of stimulation. So she would argue that Yosef had all these amazing off-the-chart skills, and he probably was a hard child to parent for that reason. We know he was a hard child to, and probably didn't do a good job navigating social, maybe he didn't pick up on social skills very well. I would think that he missed those social cues. I just thought about that now, but he probably, if he had understood what his behavior was, how it was being seen by his brothers, he might have avoided a lot of sorts. Your father is so amazing, and they roll their eyes you don't even know. He's so inattentive. He's ahead to the clouds. He doesn't understand how to do anything. He's solving, very difficult math problems in his head. So he's brilliant in the science world and the math world, but at home, he doesn't need to. The garbage is filled up, and the laundry basket is overflowing. They should take it out, So, no, that's it. So another example that I remember she gave was about Samson, Shimshon, and she called it conduct disorder. Real behavioral. But it's a stretch. I just say that as if you think back that this is not new. Thinking about people with disabilities or people. Not everybody looked like this. There were definitely individual variations. And when we look at some of the sources, and with this whole idea of mission and real, that really, that we talk about God really making different forms of people and animals, that people are really different. What about, beyond sort of people, what are some of the rules and the concepts, how do we treat people like that? And what are some of the laws that come down from the Torah about how to treat people, some of the basic things? I'm thinking about the idea of putting a michshol b'fnei iver, you should, literally it says not to put a stumbling block. It talks about chiresh, a blind person and a deaf person. And there are even commentaries, what does it matter if you can't hear it, I call you a name. Well, it's not just about your hearing it, it's about my saying it, and, to be honest with you, Yaf and I are here from the first time in Mexico City, and we've only said nice things. We love everything we've seen. The people, the city's wonderful, but I have a friend who's here on business for the last month, and we had coffee the other day, and she said, she wonders about blind people navigating. We're in Polanco, that's where she's been staying for a month. And I see that there's cutaways, they have a picture of a wheelchair, but never mind crossing the street. That's bad enough if you can see, but if you were in a wheelchair, or everything's in the shul. The sidewalks are cracked, and so everything's in the shul. No offense, but it seems like she wondered how do blind people navigate the city? That was her question. It made me stop and think about it. One of the big giants of the legislation, his name was Senator Tom Harkin. He retired from our Senate, which is our Congress, and he was one of the authors of what's called the Americans with Disabilities Act. And this is 25 years old, and it really protects people, against any type of discrimination at work, and everything has to be accessible. You have, if you build a new building, everything must be fully accessible. We run into this problem, like, our camp, obviously, it was 60 years old, and anything new has to be accessible. The subway system in New York, it was built a long time ago, but there are certain stations that have a lift, but it's hard. I mean, it's really difficult. It's still hard to navigate, but it's really, I just started to think what it was like here, but maybe you're onto something even bigger and more important is sort of the Belmclub. So that's what we're going to sort of work up to, is like, how do you change the attitude in the society? This is from the Talmud in Masechet Tani. Once Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, was coming from Migdal Gedor, from the house of his teacher, and he was riding leisurely on his donkey by the riverside, and was feeling happy and elated. He was very happy because he had studied much Torah, had a good, satisfied feeling, and a good day in the Beit Midrash. There, he chanced to meet an exceedingly ugly man who greeted him. And he said, "Peace be upon you, sir." Elazar, however, the rabbi, did not return the man's salutation. He didn't say, "Oh, nice to see you." Instead, he said to him, "Reka," probably from "rek," like empty, I guess like empty, like you're worthless. How ugly you are. And he didn't leave it at that. He said, "Are all of your fellow citizens as ugly as you are?" I mean, this is not, we would we would smack our children if they said that, or but punish them, or be very upset with them. That would not be very nice, right? The man replied, the man had a good comeback response. He said, "I do not know, but go and tell the craftsman who made me, how ugly is the vessel which you have made." Good one, got him there. When Rabbi Elazar realized that he had done wrong, he dismounted, he got off the donkey, he bowed down and prostrated himself before the man, and he said to him, "I submit myself to you, forgive me." The man replied, "I will not forgive you until you go to the craftsman who made me and say to him, how ugly is the vessel that you have made." So pretty powerful. It's shocking, right? It's, if you haven't heard the source, it's just...
So, if you will not forgive him until he dies?
So, there's a bigger context to this Gemara. I don't remember the large... Do you remember off the top of your head how this goes? Do you want to say I don't? I should have put the whole...
What was the question?
What the larger context is? I don't remember.
The rest of the story?
Yeah, do you remember the larger context of
the story? The story starts off with, right, L'olam yehadam rach kikaneh v'lo kashet eretz, right? Like you shouldn't be hard like a cedar, but you should be soft like a reed. Okay. And it's in the context of rain, because that means about rain. Somebody was saying to me.
No,
It's all about water and the power of water, and so that's how this begins. And Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon learns his lesson from this, and they walk back into town. And the rest of the story goes, they walk back into town. The man does not forgive him, and Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon gets off his donkey and follows him into town. And when they get there, the whole town comes out and says, "Oh, Rabbi, welcome." And the ugly man says, "Who are you calling Rabbi?" And he says, "This man who came with you." And he's like, "Oh, really? This is a rabbi. There should be none like him in Israel." It's a very serious critique. And then the people of the town say, "No, forgive him. And because they asked him to forgive, the ugly man to forgive him, he forgives in the end. And then Rabbi Elazar learns his lesson, and he walks into the Midrash immediately, and he says, a person should be soft and not hard. And he's, just like the Torah is written with a reed, and written into the Torah is kindness and softness.
If you see a black person, or a person with a strange-looking face, or any type of physical deformity, it says you're supposed to recite the blessing, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, mishaneh et habriot. So I was alluding to this before, that it's an acknowledgement that God does make people in different forms, and that there are very individual variations in people. Okay, which I think is beautiful. If a person sees a blind man, a person with one leg, with maybe tzara, with white blotches, you should say a different blessing. You say Dayan Ha'emet. To me, in the disabilities world, in the inclusion world, this is like the text to think about why including people is important. So this is like the big drama coming up, okay? So the Mishnah says, a priest whose hands are deformed should not lift up his hands. So we're talking about Birkat Kohanim, you say on...
you cannot do this.
The spot, not just spot. Are you going or...
No,
Yeah.
I just can't.
So
No, but the actor said that he's a Kohen,
It's
and he took that from there.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So if you live in Israel, you get this every day. If you go to Orthodox synagogue in the States, you get it on Shalosh Regalim. If you go to my synagogue for some reason, the rabbi had this crazy idea this year that they should duchen 3 times when Yom Kippur. I'd never heard this before, but we've done 3 times when Yom Kippur. Conservative synagogues, I don't think they do that so much in the States, but they're talking about the priestly blessing. And it says, so if you have some type of deformity of your hands, you couldn't do it. Why do you think? What do you think the reason behind that? Like, why if I had like blotches or white skin, red skin here?
Like Michael
Because
Jackson.
you're transporting that energy because you're kind of acting as a channel for the other people, right? So
Oh,
if
that's-
you have like a flaw, you're kind of transferring that
Oh.
to the rest.
So it's sort of like
I'm just guessing.
it's really not paying attention to you're gonna put a big next on like that's a nice thought. I never heard that. That's a nice idea that you're transmitting that. No, that's great. Any other thoughts? There's this is Talmud. It could be it could be many different things. I think the rabbis weren't as thoughtful as you. They said, you know what? They're going to stare at you. In the newspaper, if you worked in the newspaper business 50 years ago, you probably came home from work with your hands so black that no matter how many showers you took and how much you washed your hands, well, you permanently had black hands. Even if it got a little bit, maybe it was gray by the time you washed for Shabbat, but it's still going to be like that. And again, people are going to still look at him. So I'll read you some things leading up to what I put on your sheet. So the Gemara says, a Tana stated, the deformities which are laid down as disqualifying are on the face, the hands, and on the feet. So remember, the guy takes his shoes off, you're going to look at his hands, you're going to look at his toes, if something yucky coming out of it, you're not going to get your, one of the things is what he has, if he has socks on, if it's covered, okay? Rabbi Joshua ben Levi said, if his hands are spotted, he could not lift up his hands. It's been taught similarly, if his hands are spotted, he should not lift up his hands. If they're curved inwards or bent sideways, he should not lift up his hands. Now this is where they get into some insults about language and about accents. And I take this personally because my daughter has studied in a seminary in Beit Shan, near Beit Shan in Israel. And Rabbi Asi said, a priest from Haifa or Beit Shan should not lift up his hands. It's been taught to the same effect. We do not allow them to pass before the ark, either men from Beit Shan or from Haifa or from Tibonim, because they pronounce Aleph as Ayin and Ayin as Aleph. So think about people, if I have a Taimani friend and they're much more guttural, like hot, it's a very different pronunciation. And they didn't like that. So that was a bit, they thought that people would focus on the speech issue that they had there. Rabbi Chiyad to Rav Shimon, if you were a Levite, you would not be qualified to chant because your voice is thick. So maybe it was a guy, Levi, maybe he had a bad voice, and that would disqualify someone. He went and told his father, who said to him, go and say to him. So it goes on like that. Continue down. So Rabbi Huna said, now we're back on our page. Rabbi Huna said, a man whose eyes run should not lift up his hands. But was there not one in the neighborhood of Rabbi Huna who used to spread forth his hands? So he says, wait a minute, that's true, we know that, but there's a word, if you look on the Hebrew side, it says, V'im haya dash v'iro mutar. So if the people in the neighborhood were used to it, they were accustomed to it, they allowed it. Okay? So the townspeople were used to it. It says, if it has been taught to the same effect, if a man whose eyes run should not lift up his hands, but if the townspeople are accustomed, he's permitted. Next case, Rabbi Yochanan said, a man blind in one eye should not lift up his hands. Wait a minute, was there not once in the neighborhood of Rabbi Yochanan a person who used to lift up his hands? Yes, how come? Dash B'Yiro, the townspeople were accustomed to it. It's been taught to the same effect. A man blind in one eye should not lift up his hands, but if the townspeople are accustomed to it, he is permitted. And then we have a third case. Rabbi Judah says, a man whose hands are discolored, so if they work dyeing any fabric, should not lift up his hands. The Tana said, if most of the men of the town follow the same occupation, it's permitted. So if you live in a town where people dye fabric, you're not going to find someone who doesn't have their hands covered in woad or in blue or purple. So of course it's permitted. So, like I said, this to me is like the source for why it's important. How do you go about including people? And in a way, this follows a conversation we were having in the earlier session about bar mitzvah or about anything with people with disabilities. And I think that the short answer of how do you go about including people is to just do it. Okay? that as soon as you do it, then it just becomes what you do. And the example from my camp is that in 1970, probably in 1968, my mentors had this idea to put people with disabilities in a typical camp. And they went to lots of different Jewish camps. And they said, no way. Our camp is proud of using Hebrew. The level of Hebrew is going to go down. The normal kids are going to leave. It's going to disrupt the structure of the camp. All those things. And they finally found one camp, one Ramah camp, that said, we're going to do it because it's the right thing to do. And they had no idea how it was going to go. And now it's 45 years later, okay? And our one camp, now there's 9 camps, and this is one of in the United States, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, JCC, community camps. This is really happening, okay? The camps now have inclusion specialists and inclusion coordinators, and parents, if they can't find a camp, they call what's called the Foundation for Jewish Camp. It's like an overall Jewish organization, and there's a full-time person who works in disabilities inclusion, and she'll help them find a camp, because maybe some camp isn't really accessible to a wheelchair. It's understandable if the camp is 75 years old, but there is some camp like that. And what I say very proudly, and I'm going to show this in some slides tomorrow, is that the most exciting part is that nobody's head turns when they see a person with Down syndrome or in a wheelchair or with autism. It's just what we do. Like I said before, it's as natural as baseball and Shabbat and brownies on for Shabbat. It's just part of what we do. And sometimes, if a visitor comes from outside the camp, their heads turn because they're just not used to it. And what happens by doing that is that you create that next generation of kids.